Imagine this for a moment. You're floating inside a spacecraft far beyond Earth, deeper into space than most humans can even imagine. More than 300,000 kilometers away from home. No rescue mission coming, no quick back, just silence, endless darkness, and the terrifying realization that something has gone terribly wrong. Your spacecraft has exploded. Now, for most of us, that sounds like a scene from a movie, but in 1970, for 3 astronauts, this was real life. Before we continue, take a moment to like, follow, and subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what story you want us to explore next. Because today's story is one of the most incredible survival journeys in history. It all began at Kennedy Space Center. A giant Saturn V rocket stood ready on the launch pad, towering into the sky. Inside the spacecraft were 3 astronauts: Commander Jim Lovell, Commodore Module Pilot Jack Swigert, and Lunar Module Pilot Fred Haise. Their mission sounded simple: travel to the moon, land on its surface, and return to Earth as heroes. But this mission was about to become something very different. By 1970, space travel no longer shocked the world the way it once did. People had already watched astronauts walk on the moon. Another mission had followed successfully. So when this new mission launched, many people thought it was routine. Television audiences were smaller, public excitement had faded. Most people didn't realize they were about to witness one of the greatest survival stories ever told. 2 days into the mission, everything seemed normal. The astronauts were performing a routine task. They were stirring the oxygen tanks. Just another standard procedure. Then suddenly, a violent explosion shook the spacecraft. The entire ship trembled. Warning lights flashed everywhere. In that instant, the crew knew something was terribly wrong. Jack Swigert grabbed the radio and called Mission Control. "Houston, we've had a problem." Inside the spacecraft, oxygen was leaking into space, and without oxygen, the entire mission was now in serious danger. Back on Earth, engineers at NASA began analyzing the data as fast as they could, but the situation was worse than anyone expected. One oxygen tank had exploded, the second one was failing, and without oxygen, the spacecraft could no longer produce power. Without power, life support systems would eventually stop working, and that meant only one thing: the astronauts might not survive. What made it even frightening was where they were. The spacecraft was still moving farther away from Earth, not closer. At that moment, the astronauts became the farthest humans from Earth in history. More than 300,000 kilometers away. They were not heading home. They were still moving toward the moon. The mission to land on the moon was immediately canceled. From that point on, there was only one goal: bring the crew alive. Mission Control came up with a risky plan: use the lunar module as a lifeboat. But there was a serious problem. That module had been designed for only 2 astronauts, and only for a short time on the moon. Now it had to support 3 astronauts for several days. To save power, almost everything inside the spacecraft had to be turned off. Lights dimmed, heaters shut down. Slowly, the temperature inside the spacecraft began to drop. Colder and colder, until it was almost freezing. Water began to freeze on the walls. the astronauts floated through a spacecraft that felt more like an icy cave in deep space. But then, another danger appeared. Carbon dioxide levels inside the spacecraft were rising. If the levels got too high, the astronauts would slowly suffocate. And the worst part? The only air filters available didn't fit. The command module had square filters. The lunar module had round openings. It was a small detail, but now it was a life or death problem. Back on Earth, engineers worked non-stop. They gathered the exact same materials the astronauts had in space: duct tape, plastic bags, cardboard. Then they built a solution. Step by step, they guided the astronauts. Inside the spacecraft, floating in zero gravity, the crew carefully followed the instructions. Piece by piece, they built a strange-looking device, a homemade air filter. And then, something incredible happened. It worked. The carbon dioxide levels began to drop. For the first time since the explosion, there was hope. But the journey home was still extremely dangerous. The astronauts had to use the moon's gravity to swing around it and head back toward Earth. At the same time, they were rationing water so strictly that their bodies began to weaken. They were cold, hungry, exhausted. By the end of the mission, they had lost more than 14 kilograms of body weight combined. Yet they still had to perform precise engine burns to stay on the correct path. One small mistake, and they could drift into space forever. Finally, after days of uncertainty, Earth appeared in the distance. Home. But the most dangerous moment was still ahead: re-entry. As the spacecraft entered Earth's atmosphere, communications suddenly stopped. A blackout began. Mission Control waited. 1 minute passed, then 2, then 3. The silence felt endless. People began to fear the worst. Then suddenly, a signal returned. A voice came through. The astronauts were alive. On April 17, 1970, the crew safely landed in the Pacific Ocean. What began as a mission to the moon had become one of the greatest rescues in human history. The astronauts never walked on the moon, but they achieved something even more remarkable. They survived the impossible. Apollo 13 wasn't just a mission, it became proof of human determination. In the cold darkness of space, 3 astronauts faced disaster, uncertainty, and the edge of survival. And against all odds, they made it home.